Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is Monday, July 13th, and we do have a quorum. So welcome to the Monday night board meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I just wanted to let everyone know, as usual, because our meetings are being done virtually, all our votes are going to be done via roll call. All 7 board members are present tonight, and we have many staff members and administrators. Superintendent Schultz, would you like to review our agenda for the evening? Yes. And let us know who is joining us from the district?
Thank you. So tonight, you'll approve minutes from our June meetings. We have a consent calendar with some contracts as well as some purchases and some approval of membership for AMSD, Association of Metropolitan School Districts, and the School Boards Association. We have some input to read from our community. For discussion, the board will hear a presentation, a continued conversation that we started in the work session previous to this board meeting on the 2021 school year planning update. Randy and Steve and I will provide where our planning is at for next year. And then on the discussion, you will talk about board norms. We have a lot of policies to go through. Policy committee's been busy, and some changes to the HR committee to governance, and then board liaison and committee reports. So that's it.
Great. Thank you, Superintendent Schultz. We will now move on to approving.
And you wanted me to introduce who's here from
sorry.
Sorry, that was my fault. I should have said that before I turn it over to you. Want to welcome Jody D. St. Hubert to Edina Public Schools. Jody, say hello. Hello, Jody.
Hello, turning the mic off.
There you go.
Welcome, Jody. What is your new role here?
Thank you for the welcome. I am the Director of Teaching and Learning in Edina Public Schools.
Welcome. We're so excited to have you. Thank you for joining us.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
And John Tope is here, Director of Business Services. We have Leah Bird from Early Childhood, Lisa Masika, Principal of Cornelia, Mary Wardia, Director of Communications. I want to welcome Nikki Tischer to Edina Public Schools. Welcome Nikki Tischer back to Edina Public Schools.
Thank you very much. Glad to be back.
Nikki, and what is your role here at Edina Public Schools?
My role is the Director of HR and Admin Services. I'm so happy to be back after the 6-year hiatus.
Great. Well, welcome. Welcome. We're glad to have you here.
And we have the new Assistant Superintendent, Randy Smazel, and Sean Dudley from Valley View, Val Berg from Community Ed. We have Sarah Shandel, as Administrative Assistant Extraordinaire, and Zach Horn, our tech behind the scenes guy.
And I believe Mary Hyman just joined.
Oh, Mary Hyman just joined too. Mary Hyman, our health professional, our nurse, who's been just invaluable in our planning and having us think through things and setting up our protocols. So she's here tonight to be part of that planning, to answer any questions that the board may have regarding next school year.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for everyone attending tonight and anyone that is listening from home. We really appreciate you engaging in what is going on in our district. Now to approving our board minutes. So we are going to be approving our minutes from our June 8th regular meeting, June 8th special meeting, June 22nd closed meeting, and June 22nd special meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We will now vote by roll call to approve the June 8th and June 22nd meeting minutes.
Allenberg,
Aye.
Bucks,
Aye.
Green,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Michelson, Michelson,
There's a bird.
is that a yes? All right, Owen, we're voting on the minutes?
I couldn't hear anything for a while.
Sorry, Owen.
Aye.
Thank you. Shaw,
Aye.
Wallen Friedman,
Aye.
wonderful, thank you.
The June meeting minutes are approved. We're now going to move on to our consent agenda. Is there anything that anyone would like to remove from the consent agenda? Okay, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
We will now vote by roll call to approve the consent agenda.
Ellenberg,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Green,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Michelson,
Aye.
Shaw,
Aye.
Wallen Friedman.
Aye.
The consent agenda is approved. We're going to move on to community inputs that we have received via email regarding agenda items for tonight's board meeting. And just a reminder to the community that we're asking the community to email us, the board, regarding anything that they would like to give us feedback on that we have regarding board agenda items. And we have received some emails regarding our planning for school in the fall. And John Tope is going to read one email for us that the individual wanted to be shared at the board meeting tonight.
Thank you, Chair Allenberg. Hopefully everybody can hear me.
Yes.
The letter reads, Dear Edina School Board, thank you for all you do, especially in these uncertain times. I am writing because I am in a household with one college-age son, one daycare-age child, one school-age child, and two working parents. Though I know this spring was hard on all parents, teachers, administrators, and staff, it was especially hard on my husband, my sons, and myself. I am self-employed. In April and May, I missed about 120 hours of work trying to cover care and homeschool care. My husband missed even more. I know that my hours will be similarly affected if school is not reopened. More importantly, though, I am not qualified to teach, and I am especially not qualified to deliver the special services my child needs to stay up with his peers socially and academically. I am very concerned that the state is prioritizing opening gyms, pools, sports, restaurants, bars, and retail establishments over the welfare of school-age children and to the detriment of working parents. The American Academy of Pediatrics strongly advocates that all policy considerations for the coming school year should start with the goal of having students physically present in school. However, the only way we can reduce the risk of a school-related outbreak is if we otherwise control the spread of COVID in our communities through regulating and enforcing social distancing, universal masking, and other contagion control measures. This state is doing a much better job than other states of slowing the spread. But there are too many businesses and neighbors who aren't being careful enough, and they aren't being held accountable. We need to stop letting people control public health policy through false political narratives. Further, we need to be advocating for more funding from the state and federal government for our schools to be able to afford infection control measures to protect teachers and students. Please do all you can to ready this state for a safe return to school in the fall. Thank you for your time. Best regards, Jenny.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. We're going to move on to our discussion and report section, and we have quite a few items up for discussion tonight. And our first item is the 2020-2021 school year planning update. And I know we have quite a few administrators here to talk about that. So I'll turn it over to John to lead us in that discussion.
Thanks, Chair Allenberg. Before I go any further, I'll pay dearly for this, but I forgot to introduce Jeff Jorgensen, the Director of Special Services. Of course, he doesn't need an introduction, but he's here. Thank you, Jeff. So the school board in about an hour and a half discussing school year planning in the work session prior to the board meeting. So we are going to present our planning for the purpose of the community hearing what our planning is. So the leadership since the previous school year ended, leadership has worked on operations. What does it mean for our buildings, our lunchrooms, our transportation to begin to develop the 3 scenarios the governor's asked us to develop, face-to-face, hybrid, and distance learning. We also have had instructional leaders and teachers and principals working hard on doing the same for those 3 scenarios. At the same time, we've also been collecting data from parents and teachers and using that data to inform our decision-making. This data will be important as we continue to refine our thinking. You will hear tonight that this is complicated. Of course, we all know how to do face-to-face scenario, and we implemented distance learning, and we learned distance learning, and we continue to look at distance learning and improve upon it. You'll find the hybrid scenario as being complicated and complex. So we're going to give you a flyover of what we are planning at this point in time. We know that through this pandemic that information changes. We know that protocols change. We know that the governor is going to be giving us more information on what direction schools will go the week of July 27th. And at that time, we are planning to do really concentrated work and focused leadership to really refine what our school year is going to look like for the 2020-2021 school year. So more to come on that. I'm going to turn it over to Randy and Steve, who have been leading the groups. I do want to recognize the other principals that are here. Everybody on this in this meeting tonight have been working extremely hard and thinking about all the options and opportunities we can provide students when the school year begins. So I'm going to turn it over to Randy. Okay, Randy.
Thank you, Dr. Schultz. Good evening, Chair Allenberg, school board members, staff, families, and community members. We are going to share just a brief presentation of our work to date, and this is still at a very high level. I'm just going to do a check to make sure you can see my screen because I can't see you.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. First of all, we have Steve Buettner, our Director of Technology and Media Services, myself, Assistant Superintendent Jody D. St. Hubert, our new Director of Teaching and Learning, Leah Bird, our Early Learning Coordinator, Lisa Masika, our principal from Cornelia Elementary. We have Sean Dudley, our principal from Valley View, Andy Beaton, our principal from the high school, and then Sean Beaverston and Mike Walker, our 2 digital learning specialists that help do a lot of our training and preparation for our staff. And reason that we are here tonight is to just update the board and the community on some of the work that we've been doing behind the scenes since school has ended this last school year. And we received some guidance from the Minnesota Department of Education, Minnesota Department of Health about preparing for some scenarios for the fall. Scenario 1 is an in-person learning for all students. That's something we call face-to-face. Hybrid learning is scenario 2, which would require some more strict protocols, but they're generally giving us about a 50% capacity of our buildings or our classrooms for planning purposes. So we have been doing our planning, making the assumption that we are going to have some kind of limitation around 50% capacity for our buildings and working within that. This is a terribly complex model. And we'll go over generalities tonight, but we certainly are working on some more in-depth logistics behind the scenes that we're not presenting tonight. And then distance learning, which many of our families experienced last spring, at least our emergency version of it. I think we can continue to advance that from a continuous improvement standpoint. In terms of some design concepts that we discussed, prior to jumping into this work, really included, how do we maintain the rigor that Edina is known for, be really intentional about the programming and about the work and about the decisions, certainly holding safety foremost and present in our thinking and the health of our students, the well-being of our students from a social emotional standpoint. We know that, this is the relationship business. We are here because we love kids and we love supporting a community. We love being in education, and this is what it's about. So we also know that creating choice and fluidity is going to be important because we have to be responsive and adaptive to whatever comes at us as we head into the fall. And we want to be able to do it quickly, efficiently, and do it well. So those are all design concepts or constructs that kind of sit behind the scenes. In terms of our timeline of our planning and implementation, we began in June with a leadership team working on some concepts and ideas. And then they took those concepts and ideas out to input teams at the high school level, the middle school level, the elementary levels at early learning, talk to parents, talk to teachers and staff, talk to kids when appropriate, to get feedback on some different ideas about what could hybrid learning look like, what could be some ideas for improving distance learning, and what would be some important considerations for face-to-face, etc. And so we've been involving a number of parents and teachers, staff and students in this process to help formulate some Edina models. We'll talk about those models in just a second. Of course, in July here, we continue our planning. We had our work session prior to tonight to discuss this in more detail. And then we're going to continue to collect feedback around these scenarios from the community and from our staff. We're going to be launching a survey either tonight or tomorrow. It'll be early this week to our community and then to our staff to get feedback about these ideas. And then towards the end of July, we'll be receiving some final guidance from MDE and MDH about our limitations or our direction for the fall, I should say. And then we're off. We're doing our final planning. We get into August. We're going to be doing training with staff. We're going to finalize our models and our communications, be working with staff and students and families on what that's going to look like. And then we'll have to continue to be adaptable based on MDE and MDH guidance. And, our plan as a continuous improvement district is to continue to utilize feedback and have windows of opportunity for feedback from staff, from community members, from students, so that we can continue to get better, whatever it is that we're doing, whatever models we're in, we're flexing to, that we have pathways to continue to grow and get better and be responsive to those. So scenario one is about face-to-face, which everybody is familiar with, of course, but it would come with some operational protocols that would be important for us and would be some challenges, but things that we certainly can accomplish. But I think most people recognize this is the strongest model. It's most consistent. It supports working families. It supports our most dependent learners the best. And it also supports the whole child development and social emotional wellness and the relationships that are so important to us that we build with kids. Our challenges around face-to-face in the time of COVID is the social distancing. Of course, limitations of courses and activities might be required to minimize exposure. And at the same time, when we do bring kids together and other adults together, we are putting our adults and students at greatest risk for exposure. We know that busing students to school with transportation limitations could be challenging, and we still may not meet the needs of family and staff, and so we anticipate that we should also be designing for a pathway that honors all of our families and that will include distance learning. So even though we might end up starting the year face-to-face, we will have a pathway that will allow families to also utilize distance learning if that is requested or desired by those families for a variety of reasons. In terms of the hybrid, again, the most complex, the model that we are landing on, or the model that we are proposing at this point in time, is that the students would be split basically into two groups. This would be consistent K-12. And the first group would attend 2 days of face-to-face, while the other group is asynchronous at home. And then later in the week, the second group would come in face-to-face, and the first group would be asynchronous at home. And somewhere during that week would be a day that would also be asynchronous, and that would be for cleaning of the building, it would be for training for staff, and it would be for collaboration among staff. Administration is recommending that we still keep out of the 5-day week an asynchronous day because A, we're going to have to be very responsive to whatever comes our way. B, all of these models are still going to require changes and training for staff, and some more intensive than the others. And C, one of the silver linings that came out of last spring with our staff was that we enhanced collaboration greatly, and our staff have asked us to find ways to continue to maintain that because it was so beneficial to them in being able to provide a quality education to our learners. So the benefits of this would be 2 full days a week would be face-to-face. 2 days a week would be providing FaceTime with working adults, ability to keep cohorts of learners separate and still keep the building clean between those groups. And then those consecutive days help allow the teacher for follow-up and being prepared for assisting kids in the online learning component of the rest of the week. Again, the challenges are minimizing student movement in the school when you have it, managing both students who are in school and out of school. That provides, that's a unique challenge because if teachers are working with kids, then they're not able to work with the other students that are at home unless there's some ways that we can do that synchronously through maybe technology, etc. Determination of who attends what days. So basically, this is a K-12 scheduling challenge because one of the things that we talked about is ideally we'd want to have families scheduled for the same A days and the same B days or be in the same groups. Scheduling families across those levels, and then maybe challenging for most dependent learners. So we also discussed that there may be some students that come in more than 2 days based on needs. And then scenario 3, distance learning. People are familiar with this from last spring, arguably the most safe of all. It's consistent, but our challenges are supporting families who have employment outside of the home. There's certainly learning efficiency losses when students aren't under the direct guidance of a teacher. The assessment of learning is difficult. It's more challenging this way because you want to really know what do students know specifically, and that can be a challenge to do that kind of assessment. And at the end of the day, students miss each other and they miss their teachers. And again, this is the human relationship business, and so this provides the most challenge to that business. Some other considerations that we talked about for the 3 scenarios are to continue to have a day for teacher training and collaboration in that week. So 4 days of teachers face-to-face with kids, and then 1 day where they can do training, collaboration, the building can be clean. Looking at different kinds of technology, and if there's technology that would allow us to do some live streaming in specific instances or for specific purposes or lessons or content areas. A lot to be explored there. We know that we have questions about childcare and how much of it we would be providing and where that would be located. Coordination across levels is another consideration. Early childhood service model is looking at how they will provide their services, starting in the fall. And we do have Leah Bird here. She can speak more to that in a moment. In terms of distance learning, one of the things that we talked about is getting tighter about our expectations around synchronous learning activities. And so that's something to be determined yet, is exactly what that looks like, but having a more clear expectation about how we launch that. The ability to be nimble as maybe a site or a pod of students become infected with COVID, then we'd have to be responsible to that changing set of conditions and be able to either isolate that group, and they would be quarantined and distance learning. And so just our ability to do that, the special ed service model will of course align to these scenarios. We provide training and support for family, and the staffing will most likely look different based on the different scenarios. Certainly supporting our families who are unable to work from home or support their child in daily learning activities. We know that from our surveys last spring, about 50% of the families reported spending 3 hours or more per week with helping support their learner directly. And some reported more than that, some reported less, but certainly that's a strong consideration. Some students appear they are just more dependent than others based on their age or based on other services that they receive. And that can vary significantly by each of our sites. And so that has been another important discussion that we've been having. Our staff are impacted potentially by what other districts may be doing. We're unsure of what that impact may look like at this time. There might be a preference of families for AM or PM sessions. If we have a model where we did talk about a model at elementary where it was a half day kind of model, and in that model there might have been a preference for an AM or PM session. We're no longer proposing that as the recommendation for the district, but it is something that we will continue to vet out. In elementary, music, PE, and art fell to as a distant priority to other areas in distance learning. I think, for some, there was strong rationale around that, and for others, they felt our kids were really missing out on some of those opportunities without having that direct contact with those teachers. Maybe some of those lessons are difficult to administer. Many logistical suggestions have been offered by staff and parents to date through the surveys in the spring. We had 115 teachers that we debriefed with the first week we got out of school, and we've been holding these input sessions at each of the levels to continue to collect feedback, and then certainly collecting representative feedback so that we are sure that we're elevating all types of voices to reflect the population of our learners in our district. And I'll turn this one over to Steve just to talk about some of the operational considerations they've been working on behind the scenes.
Thank you, Randy. Good evening, board, Superintendent Dr. Schultz. Indeed, this is, we're being asked to develop logistics or operational logistics around those three scenarios. And each one of those scenarios are going to take energy in order to make sure that we're ready for them. So the first one, of course, is transportation, just getting to and from school. And as parents drop off students, if they decide to transport them themselves, how do we make sure those students are coming in and they're safe? This whole idea of creating bubbles of students in order to minimize social contact with other students. And so the idea of contact, or being able to ensure that a bubble of students stay safe. And so it's easier in homerooms in the elementary school, for instance, than it is at the middle school or the high school where students move from different classes to different classes. So that, again, shows the challenges that look different between age groups. Social distancing, again, during arrival and dismissal in their classes, but also making sure that when students are taking breaks, that they make sure that they're staying within their bubble and they're moving to and from classes. Food service is an issue we've been talking through, and how do we do food delivery and food? Is it in classrooms or is it in the cafeterias? How do we make sure that we're minimizing contact? Cleaning and disinfecting protocols within our buildings. How do we make sure we're marking 6 feet distance, putting up plexiglass shields where appropriately so that we're ensuring that our staff are safe working within our buildings? The idea of, again, childcare. How do we make sure that our students, when they're in the distance learning or before and after school, are being supported? And then the idea of large class sizes or extracurricular activities. What do we do for sports? What do we do for Phi-Ed, art, and classes? And so under each one of those three scenarios, we are looking at each one of these operational considerations to make sure that they're being built out for each one of the three scenarios. Next slide.
So I would like to, maybe we could have Leah and Lisa and Sean and Andy talk a little bit about some of the work you've been doing behind the scenes, who's been involved, because one of the great things about Edina is that when we have complex problems, we have such a brilliant community, we have such brilliant staff to be able to turn to and work with and partner with to figure out how are we going to create these solutions. And then after we get an update from each of the levels, maybe Mike and Sean could just talk briefly about some of the training that's been going on this summer and what that has looked like and who's been participating in that. So Leah, do you want to talk about early learning for a few minutes and just kind of what's happening there?
Great, thanks. Good evening, Superintendent Schultz, Chairperson Allenberg, board members, colleagues, and communities. It's really nice to have an opportunity to share a little bit with you tonight. As you know, I'm working down in early education, but I've really been fortunate to be a part of all of the district planning, and I'm really grateful for the collaborative and collegial work that we've done together. Early learning is an interesting little conundrum because, as you all know, the biggest difference between early learning and the rest of the district is that we're really a choice program that our families sign up for. And so we're spending a lot of time doing some surveys of families, some staff members. You can imagine what a student survey looks like for a 3-year-old and just how they feel about school and what they want to come back to. And so we are really kind of working backwards, thinking about our oldest kids. Is there a possibility that we could do face-to-face, hybrid, and distance learning? And how do we do all of those things from the safest perspective and also the most developmental perspective for early learners? So I know I'm one of 4, so I'm going to step aside and let the other 3 chat, and then we'll be available for questions, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Lisa Masika, elementary principal at Cornelia. I'll talk a little bit about our process. So we have a 6-person elementary team. So it's unique in the fact that we've got 3 different programs with CP, French immersion, and then just a traditional elementary building, combining all of the needs that we have at each one of those sites. So we have a member on our operations committee that is helping to work out kind of those operational needs, the instructional design, and then we meet very frequently as elementary principal colleagues to really work through some of the things that were, roadblocks that we come up against, those kinds of things. We met with both our families at our building to introduce some of these different scenarios, particularly as it pertains to the hybrid model. And then we also met with our staff. So a lot of us met with our building leadership team and then also opened it up to the wider staff to get some input back on what kinds of questions they have, concerns, those kinds of things. And so it's been a very collaborative process, really thinking through everyone's perspective of what they see as challenges to each one of the models. One of the things we felt like was really important as an elementary team is really defining what we felt like our big priorities were at the elementary level. And so really looking to prioritize social emotional learning. We know it was very difficult for some students in terms of being disconnected from not only their teachers, but also their peers during the last spring. And so really prioritizing when we start to come back to school, what are the things that we're going to need to do to take care of our kids? And then in addition, literacy and numeracy, those are things that are things that we really spend a lot of time focusing on at the elementary level. And so helping to support what do those things look like if we are in person, how do we prioritize those needs so that we make sure that we are really supporting our kids as learners. We looked at the models in terms of really some stability and predictability, moving more fluidly, as Randy talked about, between each one of the models. And so how are we nimble as a staff to help support kids in any one of those scenarios where we're either face-to-face, that 50% hybrid, and then in distance learning, and then also helping our staff to kind of wrap their head around what does that look like for them too, and to be able to shift easily between those pieces. We've gotten experience obviously with the 100% face-to-face model, and we've had a little bit of a taste of what it looks like to do distance learning. And so we spent a lot of our time looking at what does this hybrid look like, and what does that mean for both staff, students, and families, and what are the challenges around them. The hybrid, we're really looking at cohorting and making sure that we're staying safe, both for our students and our staff, and being able to look at what do we need to change. What does our normal day look like, and how do we do that in a way where, we usually have kids fluidly moving throughout the building, and looking for operational things that are going to help support that. And then also looking at the hybrid model from a place of, we know we have students who need additional support. Our ML students, our students who are learning English, our students who are in special education services, and then our students who are in interventions, either through ADSYS or ADSYS program or our Title I programs. And so how do we best support them and meet their needs when they're in those different models? So lots of thinking, and I know Randy also shared just in terms of when we're in either those hybrid or the distance learning, is really having the ability to connect more synchronously with students, either through streaming very specifically for things that we prioritize, like literacy and numeracy, and then also those social emotional times, but being strategic about when it's important for those things to happen so that it is meaningful for a kid who's going to connect, maybe distance or just, streaming in. So lots of things to work through, but I'm so impressed by the team here, just because it really is a collaborative process, and people have been working incredibly hard to think about every little detail that this impacts both as staff and students and parents. So
Thank you very much, Lisa. Sean, do you want to talk about middle school collaboration?
She's still on. Sean's muted, right?
Sean, you're muted.
Okay, that really helps. I've been muted before. This time I did it to myself. So thank you, everyone. Superintendent Schultz, Chair Ellenberg, and everyone. I could probably say ditto to much of what Lisa said. She did an excellent and thorough job with her explanation. We've been doing much of the same kinds of things in middle school. One of the things that I think in middle school we've often thought about ourselves is, these are not elementary kids, and these are not little mini high school kids. So how do you put together a program where it's really, there's a lot of social emotional pieces that are incredibly important. The whole concept of teaming and finding a home and making something like a big building seem smaller, and then focusing on helping support those that need support and challenging those that need to be challenged. And so there's a lot to be thinking about. Of course, we know that we did experience distance learning, and I would say that we all felt like we missed the kids, the teachers especially. One of the things that we worked hard on across the middle schools was really how do we align and have some parallel structures. So I'm really proud of the fact that Valley View and Southview really worked well together and had a very consistent rollout. In fact, some of the communications went out signed by both Dr. Anderson and myself, and so that was great. And it's nice to have that. Two middle schools is tough. There's always that comparison piece, and so the moments that we had, and there are many of them, to create that parallel structure were indeed great. I think our challenges are much like everyone else's challenges in thinking about. I will just say this: if you've ever been in middle school, how do they ever keep their hands off one another? I mean, really. So thinking about, face to face and hybrid, how do we keep masks on kids? And I hope spring's eternal. So I do feel like kids are going to come back having a protocol from their own homes that's going to be very helpful. But I think middle school kids are just in their quirky, awesome selves. They have a lot of energy. And so like really being consistent and being specific with kids, but building rationale and realizing that they're not, the frontal lobe's not fully developed. They're not many high school kids, and they're not elementary kids. I think there's a great opportunity for in the hybrid model and even the distance learning model to build some independence in learning. One of the really cool things that I think that I experienced in distance learning is I had kids routinely email me about attendance. And I've never gotten so many emails from like kids in my life. And they would always tell me what they did and why, here's what I did and I forgot to do my attendance button. And so will you please count me there? And I would always say yes. But like that was an opportunity, like that was a really great skill. Like how do you advocate for yourself? How do you get, those things? And so that was great. As far as our process goes, much the same. We had focus groups with parents. We also had a staff survey and are looking to do, to make sure that we have all the voices in the room, looking to work with Blanca and Abdi Kadir and Albert McGee and helping get some of the voices that we didn't necessarily see at our focus groups. So great input, thoughtful input. And we had a great team with our admin, our deans, and teaching staff. So that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Sean. Andy, can you speak a little bit to high school? And then Mike can maybe share a little bit about how we've been preparing teachers this summer and some of the summer learning opportunities happening.
Evening, everyone. Superintendent Schultz, Chair Allenberg, members of the board and the community. Appreciate the opportunity to visit with you tonight. I don't have a ton to add from what I'm hearing from my colleagues have expressed. The high school has done various focus groups with students, with parents, with teachers. I have another teacher focus group coming up. I have another parent focus group coming up. We're just trying to gather as much input as we can and have. Sometimes the students have given us the greatest insight about little changes and tweaks that we can make. And we're on our fifth draft, I think, of what I initially thought coming into what a hybrid model could look like. We continue to get good ideas, but I'm really excited, even with the complexity of a hybrid, that we may have landed on something that maybe in some way can work between all the levels, elementary and early learning and middle and high school, at least with the structure of our day. But really good insights that have come, and there's clearly challenges at all levels, whether it's more dependent learners in elementary school versus just the volume of kids and passing times and things like that at the high school, about how you deal with that. So we're going to look at the guidelines that come out from the state, and we will be ready. I can just say that I'm feeling confident that we will be ready with whatever the state throws at us. Our teachers have responded in an incredible way in distance learning, and they will do it again. But we also have to find ways to support them, to give them that capacity to do a great job and continue to do a great job. So thanks for the opportunity to visit, and I can take questions later if you have them.
Thank you, Andy. And Mike, if you're on, can you give us an update on some of the summer training pieces?
I would be happy to. Chairperson Allenberg, members of the board, Superintendent Schultz, and the community, thanks for the opportunity. This summer, as we prepared to kind of shift from our distance learning and really kind of emergency planning and moving into having some time to look at best practice and other things like that, we designed a course that allowed for teachers to reflect on the process that they went through over the last few months of the school year, and then do some learning and then some planning and preparation and collaboration on what learning might look like this fall. So we kind of took our learning framework and looked at the learner profile, for example, and we said, looking at social and emotional learning, looking at culturally and linguistically responsive instruction, and building community, because we know we had the benefit of 7 months of relationships between our teachers and students last year, whereas now we're going into a new school year where the kids and the parent students and the teachers don't know each other as well. And so ways to build community if we have to be at a distance, and even when we're face to face, and then moving back and forth if we're in a hybrid. Looking at customized pathways and how to look at hybrid learning and ways and models of hybrid learning and how those work. And then picking some things like proficiency-based progress, looking at how grading might work, how to make it so that not every single thing is graded by the teacher, but maybe there's some self-reflection on the student's part, or maybe there's some peer feedback from the students through with support from the teacher as a way to cut down on the amount of work and different things to help make it work, especially if we're in that hybrid model. And then looking at our learning spaces. And so we've had some resources on design of our electronic learning spaces, school Seesaw, et cetera, and some best practices with that. And then today, we led 4 hours. We had 2 hours with secondary and 2 hours with elementary staff, kind of doing some preliminary work and what tweaks we can make, what things we can improve upon, so that when we move into whatever form of learning we're doing in the fall, that our digital resources are set up in a way that are going to be consistent and support our learners and support our parents and families.
Thank you so much, Mike. And then maybe one more, Jeff Jorgensen, if you're still on, maybe you can speak a little bit to some of the other training that has been offered, the executive functioning training, and also some of the considerations from a student services perspective for these three scenarios.
Yeah, for the three scenarios on special education, we'll just start there. So the first tier of services really was defining these three tiers of service that we would, or scenarios of service that we would have in special education. Now we will be moving to work with our providers to generate alternatives on how we can work within that service framework, and also determine some rubrics on determination of what level of student need needs to be considered as we move back into face-to-face services and consideration of some distance learning. That will be a student-by-student decision process facilitated through the IEP team process, and so it's very personalized moving forward. So not something that we're going to do in broad strokes across the district. Rather, it will be very personalized based on student need. Some training that we're looking forward to and have conducted already. We've done 4 hours worth of executive functioning training with Sarah Ward, nationally recognized speaker in the area of executive functioning skills, and are asking her to continue on with us as we open up the school year. Twice a month to provide some very focused training in the area of executive functioning on the areas that teachers and students are reporting the most need with. So we're looking forward to scheduling that training with her and making that available to our teachers on a regular basis throughout the school year, so that they can get some of these questions answered. Finally, we're also working, as Lisa Masika and as Sean has talked about, with social emotional learning, that extends not just to our students as we try to prepare for our students' return, understanding that many have struggled with high levels of chronic stress, and we want to make sure that we're meeting their needs socially, emotionally, and if there's mental health concerns, that we have a continuum of service put into effect so that we can meet the needs of the students no matter what scenario we find ourselves in. We've been working with our co-located service provider, Fraser, to assist us in the development of an accurate continuum, and we will be working also then on also shoring up our practices on wellness strategies for our teachers. Stress levels are not just on our students, they've also been on our teaching community and our paraprofessional community. We want to make sure that we've got a healthy and engaged staff so that they can have something to give to those students that are in need.
Thank you, Jeff. At this time, that concludes our presentation. We'll just turn it over to the school board and see what questions you have for any of our administrators that are here this evening.
Great, thank you, everyone. I'll just echo what Randy said, and I'll open it up to school board members for any questions or comments that they might have for everyone that is here tonight. And I would just like to thank everyone for all the work that they've done pulling all of this together. I know it's extremely complex and challenging, and that we are waiting for direction from the state before we can put a lot more details into the plan. So I just wanted to thank you guys, but I want to open it up to the rest of the board for any questions that they might have. Anyone?
This is Matt. We did spend a lot of time as a group discussing this in the work session prior to this meeting, just for those that are just joining this webcast. There was some discussion also. Ellen raised a good point around finance, and I wanted to just make a point that from that perspective, each of these three scenarios is being played out within the Finance and Facilities Committee meetings and also by the Finance Department. And I'm really appreciative and grateful for all the work that the lead team is doing and coordinating with the finance group to try to prepare to make sure that all of these groups are well staffed and well supported. But thanks for all the work everyone's doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, to echo what Matt said, we had quite a discussion earlier, and the team did a great job of working up so many different contingencies and how to address the hybrid model. And those who are in the public reading the document may wonder why there isn't more discussed about a more robust face-to-face model. And I started a discussion about that. And much of the reason for that is because it is the easiest to implement. So just for the community's understanding, it's not as if that's being given short shrift. It's certainly been considered, but it's the easiest of the three to work up. So just that background.
Yeah, thank you, Owen. And for community members that are watching tonight, some other issues that we talked about in the work session, which I of all board members and all the educators and administrators here tonight, are how do we bring students on board and understand where are they at from an educational perspective, and understand where might they need interventions. And so that was one thing that was discussed. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up, which was touched in the presentation, is that obviously as a district, we're here to educate students. That is what the focus of these presentations are on, is the education of students. But it's very important to me that as a district and as a leadership team, that we're also focusing on the health and safety of our staff and our educators and the people that are bus drivers and things like that. So that's a very important aspect to this. It's not, it's something that we're focusing on, at least said out loud. So that's the main comment that I wanted to make. But I just wanted to see if anyone else has any other comments or questions for everyone that has been here tonight.
Schellenberg, maybe I'll just put Mary Whitey on the spot and ask her just to comment a little bit on the communications and so kind of her thinking and planning that she's put out there for the community. Mary, do you just want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. So, we've just heard a lot about how complex things are on our side of the street, trying to bring all these plans together. But we fully acknowledge that it's pretty complicated at home too. And so what we've learned from conversations with parents and through the distance learning experience that we all had is that parents at times felt overwhelmed by communication that they were receiving. The amount of communication, there were too many places to check for information, and sometimes there's inconsistency. Some teachers do it better than others. So the focus for communications is that we're trying to create an organized, centralized, consistent communication resources so that families will know when to expect things, where to find things, and just try to ease that burden a little bit for all of the scenarios. And so one of the things we're working on is creating district web pages for each of the scenarios. Of course, as those become developed, we get to build the content, but these pages will be sort of icon based so that it'll be easy for somebody to look at that page and see what they want to know. So they'll be able to find out information, of course, links to their academic information and schedules, kind of like in the distance learning model where there is a link to that information. But then also they'll be able to learn more about how we're creating safe learning spaces. What are some of the physical things that we're doing in terms of plexiglass barriers and how we're managing air handling systems. And then we'll have information about the health safety protocols that are in place for students and staff. We'll also have information about the health safety practices related to if a student becomes sick at school, or if we learn that a student or staff member has been exposed to COVID or tested positive. How do we determine what are the next steps for that? And then information too about childcare, transportation. I know everybody has questions about, or will have questions about numbers of kids and buses. And so all of that information will be available on a page where they can go and find answers or a link to another page that'll bring them there. In addition to that, we're also working on updating all of the back to school pages that everybody is used to finding with vaccination information. And as soon as we know what the Get Connected and open house days can look like, we'll be adding that information as well. I'm working on a best practice recommendation for teachers and principals and schools and staff in general, just based on the things that I mentioned earlier, and so that folks know where they can find the information that they're looking for. Steve and I have had kind of some preliminary conversations about leveraging Schoology and some of the tools that we already have, so that a parent who has 3 or 4 kids in the district isn't getting emails from 4 teachers and 4 principals. And so they can know they can go to one place and find all of the teacher contact information, all of the communications. And then on the website for the district-wide information. And then I'm working on, the timeline is to a degree, we're waiting to hear from the state as soon as they've made their announcement, as soon as we've wrapped up and nailed down all of our plans. I think John made a statement earlier that on August 10th is when we have committed to having the full plan ready to go. So then we will roll it out in the usual way that we do things. But we'll open the websites and we'll have information on social media, our e-learning, or our newsletters in the know are set to begin again on August 6th. So those typically come out every other Thursday, but we can put them out as often as we need. And that's kind of where we're at. And then we're looking for ways that we're going to get feedback. So I think there's a number of opportunities, again, at the open houses, depending on how they look, and developing FAQ pages. And I have a few other ideas that aren't fully baked yet, but they're coming.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, thank you, Jen.
Can I say something really quick, Erica, before we?
Yeah, of course.
Just in response to Mary, what you were saying too about communication, but one of the things, and we talked about this in the work session, but in our conversation, but just about the incredible collaboration that's gone on across our district. And for people that have just tuned in now, I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I really like how our whole approach, it feels very proactive in a scenario where there's variables that we can't control. And so I appreciate that as a board member looking ahead. I mean, even with knowing that, our lead team has the week of July 27th off to get down and all these different scenarios, we can't just pull one off the shelf, right? When we hear what the governor says, it's going to have to, it's going to have to be massaged and how that looks. And so I just really appreciate that. And I just want anyone who's watching from home to realize that the planning is going on. So when the governor comes out with his announcement, you're not going to get an email 5 minutes later because there's planning that goes into it. I just wanted to say that out loud. So that's all. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you for mentioning that, Julie.
Yeah.
Mary, I just want to jump in and say that I'm really excited about everything you shared. I think as a parent and a board member, just hearing that work is being done is very reassuring to me. So Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Anything else? Well, thank you to everyone again for your hard work and dealing with planning for all these complex issues. And as soon as we know more and have time to plan, and as Mary alluded to, we'll communicate all that we can to the community and look for, when is this survey going out?
Mary, when's the survey this week?
Yes, I'm hoping for tomorrow. We need to do the translation of it yet, so it should. I think it should be able to go tomorrow.
Great.
And I also want to thank the board for their support in these complicated times and for thinking through the challenges we have and keeping the expectations in front of us to ensure that we're delivering quality, engaging programs for kids.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next thing on the agenda are the board norms. And we've discussed this at various work sessions. The board norms, I believe this is the first time it's come to our regular board meeting. So just to ground anyone that is listening, this document is intended to highlight expectations we ask of ourselves as board members. The policies and board norms should complement each other and be consistent with each other. And I just want to turn it over to anyone on the HR committee if they have any comments before the rest of the board weighs in on the board norms document. No comments? I'll turn it over to the rest of the board. If they have comments on the board norm document, that's up for discussion tonight and will be up for action in August.
The only comment I wanted to make, I think that this is a great additional policy in clarifying and kind of working towards the strategic plan if we're looking ahead at our professional excellence that we're committed to and kind of setting, just reaffirming the standards that we as a board hold. And so I just wanted to point that out, that it really does line up with what we have promised in the strategic plan in terms of what our goals would be. So.
Yeah, and the only other thing is that this should be viewed as a living document. I guarantee it's not perfect as it exists. But that's why we're here as a board. If we see things that we want added or deleted, we're always here that we can make changes to it. I think that the intent is to get something started. It's the best that we put a lot of work into it as a board. But since we haven't had a document like this ever before, it probably is not perfect. I guarantee it's not perfect. But we need to start someplace. And so I just want to acknowledge that that it is not probably perfect, but that is all. Ellen?
Yeah, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about some of the items that we also talked about at our last meeting with respect to communications.
Sure.
And particularly the items that have to do with board members. I think it's all through, I'm looking for the document now on our files to say exactly which one it is. It's communications. I think it's the last three items. And I just would like to have some clarification.
Also in the board norms.
So it would be, I found it here. Under communications, we had talked a little bit about, at many of these meetings, we had talked about getting some clarity on what it means to for number 3, to speak in an official capacity outside the boardroom, only when given specific authority from the board. So I'm just wondering if we could get some clarity on what that means.
So I believe when we've discussed this, we've talked about is when we are attending events as board members, that we can only represent views of the board or the district if we're given specific authority from the board.
Okay, and that makes sense, but this seems a little broad. This is much broader than that. Because it's saying outside of the boardroom, is that for any communications?
Can you give an example of what you're concerned about?
Well, I'm just trying to figure out if that means, if we say, well, I'm speaking for myself, if I write a letter and I say I'm speaking for myself and not as in the capacity, in my official capacity, but I'm speaking for myself.
I think that's why it says speak in an official capacity.
Okay, so in letters, if I sign, I'm speaking for myself and not as a member of the board, that would then comply with this directive.
Well, you couldn't violate other ethical clauses. Like you couldn't go and say like everybody on the board made a bad decision last week. Sign Ellen Jones, community member. I mean, there's a bit of a logic test to it.
Right, but if I'm just saying something else, is that? I mean, this is. I'm just clarifying. So I could go on Facebook and say something and say this is my opinion and not the opinion of the board. And you guys know I don't go on Facebook, so this is just an example. But if I were to, is that what you mean by this?
So the intent of this and the reason, and if we need to clarify it, the intent of this was, and the reason the word speak is in there is that when this was written, it was when we were thinking of board liaison positions and going to events and actually speaking in an oral capacity and representing the board. And when you represent the board in a liaison position, that you are there as in a board, you're there representing the board, and that you can't speak
for the board
in those capacities.
So Ellen, at the title above number 3, this says board communications we will strive to. So this is in reference to, as Erica is saying, official board business. So as Erica's referencing, like being at one of the schools that we represent at a PTO meeting, or sitting on any of the committees, even if it's, only 2 or 3 members there. So it references that above it where it says in board communications, we will strive to.
So if we need to say when you're physically speaking, when you're physically representing the board, and if that needs to be spelled out, then then we can spell that out. But it's talking about speaking.
But is it okay to write then?
I personally think that is something that we need to have additional meetings about protocols from a written and a social media perspective, because I don't think we have clear guidelines about that.
Well, that's what it looked like. That's what these guidelines were attempting to do, is to set up guidelines for the board, so we would all understand what is being expected of us. So
within board communications.
Pardon me?
Within board communications, as it states above that.
So go ahead, Lenny.
Yeah. So as an individual member of the community, you can make comments. I mean, there's no restriction. When you're wearing your school board hat, then you have restrictions.
Okay.
I view it really that simply.
Right, and that's fine, but that's it. To me, this was this. Maybe you want to say for it. It could be construed very differently.
Is anyone else confused by this bullet?
No, because it says official.
Or do you have a
capacity.
suggestion, Ellen?
No, I'm not confused.
Okay, so you're saying that it is that the word speak is not is really clear to you all, that when and I just am, so if that's all that means,
So
I understand that. And then
I would say official capacity is clear. In other words, you're wearing your board hat, follow certain rules. You're not wearing your board hat, there are other rules.
right, and that you state that you're not wearing. There's some way that you're stating, well, these are just my, because everybody knows everybody in this community. So sometimes I think if people are not saying, no, these are my views and not the views of the board, then that is going to be considered something that the community will think you're speaking for the board.
So I would just like to reiterate that I just said these probably aren't perfect. So unless someone has a suggested change, I think we need to move on from this bullet point.
The way I've interpreted this is as speaking, and a number of months ago, we talked about a specific instance, and that is if one of us were to attend the AMSD, and I had been the AMSD representative last year, and if I had a dissenting opinion that didn't represent the Edina School Board, I would stand and say I'm with the Edina School Board, but I am now speaking for the Edina School Board. I'm speaking for myself. And we had a consensus about that, and so that's not speaking for the board.
Correct.
And so that's how I see it. And I
That's
think
fine.
Eric,
I got it. I got it. Number 5, then, respond to community member emails. I'm just looking in that, and this one seems to pertain only to emails that contain substantive district or board information.
Correct.
So just explain a little bit what do you mean by that?
So as we talked about at previous board meetings, that we want to give board members the discretion to reply to constituents to say, thank you so much for emailing the board. I hear your concern. It was nice seeing you the other day. Because there was concerns raised, which are legitimate, that we want to acknowledge people and board members want that personal connection. The concern lies in when multiple board members reply to the community with substantive answers that differ. And so you have 7 board members replying to the same constituent saying different things. If board members want to reply with substantive information, that needs to go through John.
Right. Okay, good. Because what that leaves is, what I'm hearing is, and this is has been my concern before, was that board members were not going to be able to respond and would not be able to respond to people who are writing, and even if I was not going to give them any substantive district information, and I was referring them to John for substantive district information, that and yet I was expressing my own opinion that there might be something wrong with that. And from what I'm reading, this doesn't speak to that.
Yes, it does, because you just said you included your opinion. That's where the opinion is a substantive response. So you can respond by saying, thank you for your email. Please know that I've read it and that the board takes these seriously. If you have further issues, you can communicate directly with John. But as soon as you give your opinion, you've now ventured into a substantive response.
Which doesn't that also break open meeting law, which is why is kind of the root of this, is that then we're discussing an issue that all of us have been informed of through an email, correct?
It's potential, but it doesn't.
Okay.
I think it's more that we're to speak as one with official board communication.
Right.
I was the one who had, I think, some of the biggest concerns with this back when this was first read in January. And it was very restrictive. And the language has been opened up quite a bit. And I think this is a big improvement over the initial language, because I wanted to have at least some kind of human contact with people. And if they send something into us, they troubled themselves to communicate with us, that we can just give them, hey, thanks for emailing us. Appreciate your thoughts. That's about the level of it.
For sure.
Right, but Ellen, if it was, I think it's one level further. It's in between what Ellen said and what you said. So if somebody emailed you or as a group and they said, "Hey, did the board make a decision yet on the fall schedule?" You could write back, "There is a board meeting upcoming. Please attend and or watch. No decision has been made." Like, that's not an opinion. It's not something that was private, and it's not anything inappropriate. So you could say that. No, there's a meeting on the 20th. There's a meeting on the 13th at 7 p.m. You could reiterate something public that's static. Not, there'll be an awesome meeting on the 13th, but we'll solve all the problems. That's the bandwidth. But I mean, it's just a logic test. But you can be human, one level further, I think, than just thanks for your email. You could say thanks for your email. Meeting on the 13th.
Is Trevor still on the line?
I don't know why we're still on this topic. To be honest, it's been 20 minutes.
Well, I was just wondering, is Trevor still there?
Trevor's here for the pandemic, when I know he had to go away for a bit, and he was going to come back.
I was just going to ask him if he felt. I sometimes when school districts put things in that are potential for future lawsuits. It just, I'm just wondering if he thinks that this wording is okay.
He's actually reviewed this document multiple times, so.
Okay, as long as he's gone through it and he doesn't see any First Amendment right issues, then and that's what I'm hearing.
He actually had no issues when it was more restrictive, so I can't imagine he would have issues now.
Okay. And then the last question I have is on make requests for data, either to the full board, and I'm just wondering when a board member would be able to do that at a board meeting. Or we could bring that up during the discussion of board meeting agendas, which is later in this agenda.
Yeah, I think that's
I was going to say, Erica, I think when we talked about this was more like, let's say there's a teaching and learning presentation. We say, gosh, it'd be really interesting to understand what percentage of kids this impacts or what percentage of families. Then moving forward, we would then say, okay, is that information that the board thinks is important? Is that data that we agree as a board that we need either in our group decision making or in your own personal decision making? So I think when we talked about that in HR, that was some of the examples that we used for that.
Yeah. So
right, and I think that that's really valid, and I want to make sure that the staff is not inundated with data requests, and I want to honor the fact that this is something that we all see as very important, but I also want to make sure that there is a system for making that happen. So I think in our last meeting, we had talked about having data requests as looking ahead, so that as we look ahead as a board to what's going to be on our agenda, if we would need data, that we would be given that opportunity to bring that up at a board meeting well ahead of time and decide if that is useful for the discussion. So if not, then we would be asking for data after the item is on the agenda, and that would be not very timely.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in an ideal world, you're absolutely right, Ellen. I think in reality, I don't think that we have that process set up.
So maybe we can talk about it when we talk about the agenda, that maybe that is an agenda item, but we can talk about that later.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
And then the last thing is, if a board liaison cannot make their liaison commitment, it is their responsibility to find a replacement. So I would suggest that that be a little bit broader to say, I mean, if we can't make a meeting, we can certainly sometimes, I think some of us have talked with the meeting organizers to get the information. I don't think that finding a replacement is the only alternative. And so I would suggest to add to that sentence, it is their responsibility to find a replacement or fulfill their role some other way.
So I think that makes sense to a certain degree. If you're going to miss a random meeting, if you're going to miss consecutive meetings, then I think that you would then have an obligation to make sure someone else is there, because you're assuming that, well, let me put it differently. At a meeting, a question may come up. If a board member isn't there, there's nobody there to answer the question for the whole group, and it becomes cumbersome. But I can understand if you miss a random meeting, the organization can probably cope with once in a while not having a school board member there. But again, if you're going to miss multiple meetings, I do think the onus should be on the board member to make sure there's somebody there for most of those meetings.
I am not the one that has a whole lot of other responsibilities. I'm actually quite concerned about making sure that everyone can fulfill their board responsibilities and won't be, so I'm just thinking that we may want to have some flexibility here.
Right. So we can just change it to say it is their responsibility to provide adequate representation at the meeting, because under that verbiage, adequate representation may be a phone call before the meeting. It may be a phone call after the meeting.
Absolutely. I like that, Lenny. Thank you for perfecting that sentence.
Okay.
Did you get that, Erica?
Yep.
Okay.
Any other comments on the board norms document?
Yes, I have some. This is a pretty significant initiative, and for the community, this has been appearing in work sessions since January, and I think there's a number of things that are welcomed about it. I can call some of these out. Board communications. The superintendent will update the board on a biweekly basis. I think that's fantastic. I've been enjoying getting John's communication. I've been picking up a lot of things from that. I'm very enthusiastic on the bottom of page 106, items 3, 4, and 5, how we actually communicate with each other, focusing on issues, not personalities. We're expecting full articulation of views and ideas and respect for different perspectives. I am very enthusiastic about language like that. There's a number of other things that offer clarification, which I think are welcome. I won't go into those. However, there are some things that I'm less than enthusiastic about, and for the community's sake, the 7 of us have talked about this enough that I pretty much have a sense of where everyone lands on this, and so I'm not raising this for discussion, but more for a statement. And on page 105, at the bottom of the role of school board and superintendent, I'm less than enthusiastic about Observe clear distinction between the board and superintendent responsibilities. In general, I very much concur with that. So 98% of what we cover. But I don't like language that is that tight about it because I don't want to have the board on principle surrender board prerogatives to attend to certain details that are statutorily mandated that we have a prerogative to weigh in on, such as curriculum and textbooks. Another point that I'm not enthusiastic about.
Oh, where are you?
Yeah, Owen, you're on the board norm document?
Are we not there?
No.
Yeah.
Are you you're on page 1 where it says role of superintendent?
I'm sorry. Lenny, I printed out, it's page 1.
Okay.
I used your advice and printed out the whole thing. And so this is page, I'm sorry. Yes, this is page 1.
I was like,
where?
So
page 1 of board.
Yeah, you said?
Which one was it, Owen?
And so this was the last sentence in the role of school board and superintendent. And my concern there is I voiced that before, and this also comes up later on in board committees. I'll get to that.
So are you saying the sentence that starts with the board will focus on strategic leadership rather than administrative details?
The board will focus on strategic leadership rather than administrative details. Observe clear distinction between the board and superintendent responsibilities. And I guess focus, clear distinction. I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. And I don't even mean to have you change the language because I think I've gauged your sentiment over these many months and how you feel about it. And I'm just sort of reading something into the record here. And so, I mean, if you want to concede it, I think the bigger, it comes up again on page 3, and it's pretty clear here on board committees, section 4, committees will not stray into management work and not direct. Basically, that's the phrase I don't like. And so we have the ability to go into management work. We have a statute that prescribes that we have that authority. And it spells out curriculum and textbooks. And I've said this a number of times, and so I don't expect to change anyone's mind. But this being a public meeting, it is just, I owe it to my role to speak to that. So I'm not inviting, we can have a discussion on it if you'd like, but we've talked about this in the past. And so I just sort of want to get through the meeting. And so if you want to talk, go ahead. But I'm also concerned, since we're there on page 3, with number 5, committees will not initiate work outside the scope of administration recommendations without full board approval. To me, that is, again, a surrendering of some board prerogatives that we are technically in charge of the district. And if any board member were to initiate an idea that reflects the will of the people, and it shouldn't have to be checked with the administration. And administration, do you feel good about what this particular initiative I want? No, it kind of gives veto authority to the administration. I'm not comfortable with that.
So it doesn't give veto authority to administration. It gives veto authority to the full board.
Well, administration recommendations and clear, true. And so I'm still also frustrated with even under that interpretation of it, Lenny, because committees should be able to initiate ideas and then bring them to the board. And if the board doesn't like it, then it's knocked down and it's out of consideration.
Right. So the committee comes up with an idea. It doesn't push the administration to work on that idea until it goes to the board and gets approval to then direct the administration.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually what that's saying.
Yeah. So committees can talk about stuff. They just can't give direction to administration without the board approval. And part of that is because committees do not have decision-making authority.
Okay. If that's how it's interpreted, I'll grant it. Then I'll back off. Okay. Then point 3, committee members who are also board members, language has been reworked, will not seek to hold meetings of a committee outside the presence of the administration or other non-board members who are members of the committee, and no meeting will be held without providing prior notice to the administration. For the community, we've had a number of discussions about this, and I'm not enthusiastic about this because I think 3 members of the board represent the public, and they can choose to meet on their own, and for a number of reasons of expediency, just to get through some business, to talk through concepts. It's honoring of the open meeting law, and it's a way to expedite business when there's a formal committee meeting. It also gives a little breathing room for the board members to think out their thoughts and then to gather them and then to present them to the administration. So again, I don't expect to carry the day on this. We've had many conversations about it. And so those are my thoughts there. And then flipping to page 4, recognize the distinction between monitoring data and management data. I don't recognize that distinction. I think anything prohibited by the Data Privacy Act is what is not germane, but pretty much anything else could be and might be helpful to be released to the public. So I'm just uncomfortable with that. And then the last point, flipping back to page 1, we make our decisions based in page 1 in fulfilling our roles as members of the Edina School Board. Number 1, we will make our decisions based on available information, and our obligations will supersede any conflicting loyalty a board member may have. I'm uncomfortable with that. We talked about this before. I thought, what happens if we have somebody who runs on a campaign that they're very clearly, a person's very clearly in Planned Parenthood or in Citizens for Life? Well, they're going to bring that in. And I think they have the right and privilege to bring that in. And so I'm conflicted about how that would appear, that we now have language that a person could be, their communication could be inhibited by that. So again, I don't expect to carry the day on this. We've talked about it, but this is the public meeting, and I guess I just wanted the public to know that I had some reservations on it. And so apart from that, there are a number of good things in here. So, and we can move on unless somebody wants to take up some of the things I want to talk about. Otherwise, we can talk about policy.
Lenny, I think Lenny and Julie have comments.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing, and I know this isn't, I know that you didn't want to bring it up for discussion, but I feel that that was a lot of different points that you made. So I just wanted to counter one of them, and that was the last one, was that you have issue with any conflicting loyalty a member may have to advocacy or interest groups. The board role that we were elected to is nonpartisan. And it's nonpartisan because we don't have constituents as board members. We take an oath to that when we come in. Every decision we make needs to be in the best interest of all of our students. And so if I had a personal idea and an ideology that I wanted to bring, I bring it to the board, and then the board decides whether or not we're going to discuss it or not. So I just want to say that out loud to anyone who's watching this meeting. If you want to be a partisan candidate and run a campaign like that, that's your prerogative. But when you get on this board, we are nonpartisan. It's not political, right? We shouldn't be swayed by personal opinions on how we make decisions for all the students. So I just wanted to say that out loud because I just think it's a really important distinction. So
you said that before, Julian. You've articulated very clearly here too.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So the only thing I want to note is, Owen, this does not preclude you from bringing ideas to the board. So you've said that this would preclude you from, if you ran as a, in favor of ABC, it would preclude you from bringing ABC. It doesn't preclude you from bringing that issue to the board. All it says is that when you actually make your decision, it should be in the interest of the students, not the interest of a single issue that may not be in the interest of all students. That's all it says.
And as you articulate that, I agree with that spirit. Yes. I'm concerned with the language not being read that way. So.
Ellen?
Okay. And as Owen is saying, we've talked about this a lot. I'm going to try to keep this short. All the board members know my opinion on this, but I will say this for the public. My feeling about board governance has everything to do with policy and living and abiding by the policy that we have created. And I'm concerned by this document. This is not a policy document, but it reads like a policy document. And so it is something, the hierarchy of the way that boards are ruled by law is that you have state law and practice, and then policy, and then below that you usually have your appendixes, and then somewhere in this is supplemental to that is this board norms document, which I have been told is like a handbook, but this document is not written like any regular handbook. It reads quite a bit like our policies, and it duplicates many of our policies. And I just think that as clean governance, meaning clean, not anti-corrupt, but as to keep things very easy to find what the rules are when it comes to whether it's committees. You look at the policy committee, the policy on committees, or if it's on our ethics, you would look at in that section of the policy on ethics. But this is hanging out there separate and supplemental to those policies, and I think that it just might create some confusion in the future. And so I really have never liked this as a separate document. I know I've said that to you before, and I think it just adds to the verbiage that new board members need to read and become acquainted with, instead of just putting the many good ideas that are in this document into the actual policies. So there are many good ideas, and then there are some that I don't really care for so much. And we've talked about all of those, and those are my comments about this document.
I just want to make one more quick comment, if that's okay, and then I'll be done. But I think the need, from my understanding, is this document was brought forward because we needed to improve our standards as a board and how we all work together and behave, and how we act as a board, and what is important to us, and how we want to raise those standards for ourselves. So I look at this as a way to do that, and with different understanding that we are going to act ethically at all times. And so to me, that's the importance of this document. And no, I agree, Erica, it's not 100% perfect, but it's a great starting point to get us to a better place. So I just wanted to state my opinion since others stated theirs. So
I want to concur with everything Julie said. I think that we are making a lot of improvements as a board, but I think anyone in the community, any one of us, I think have to admit that our meetings have left a lot to be desired over the last year or so. And I think that if our policies were enough for us to run outstanding governance meetings, then we would have been doing that, and we have not. This is to highlight for us the expectations we set for ourselves and for the community to hold us accountable for how we behave, how we govern ourselves, And I hope our community holds us accountable. I don't know about everyone on the board, but I've worked in a corporate environment my entire life. There are always multiple sets of documents that you adhere to. There's HR policies, and then there's always an employee handbook that highlights the legal requirements, but then tells you things that don't belong in the HR policy guidelines. But what you really need to know as an employee, and that's how I view this book, and which is why there are many other boards across the country that have policies, but then they also have board norms, because I view our policies as the law of our district. They're the laws of our district. This is a snapshot of what we should do as a board. So like I said earlier, they're to complement each other. This is not intended to be policy. Maybe in a year or 2 or 3 years, we won't need a board norm document. One would hope not. But at this point in time, my intent is to have our board norm document at all of our board meetings, and that we hold each other accountable for how we should behave, how we should treat our administration, how we should treat each other, and what we should expect of each other. And I hope that we are a very highly efficient, we are all leaders, because when we are not, the only people that suffer are the students in our district. So with that, I'm going to see if anyone has any other comments about the document itself. We have discussed this ad nauseum, but I want to make sure that people have the opportunity in public to say what they would like to about this document. Matt?
I just have one closing comment to make, and that is that, yes, I have some issues with this document, as I've stated here, but for the public and the community, I want the community to know that I feel that I've been heard and listened to and respected. And I think that that's a tribute to Lenny, how you set things up when you became board chair. And Erica, you've been running efficient and fair meetings. So lest the public get an idea otherwise, I wanted to communicate that I think operationally on the ground, I feel that we've been permitting one another to have their opinions heard. I've been feeling that my opinions are heard. So anyway, that's what I just wanted to wrap up with.
Thank you, Owen. Matt?
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Owen. Yeah. I mean, I think overall, when it's come to the big decisions, whether it's start times or, budgetary decisions or things like that, we've come together really well. I think it's all these little things that have distracted us from the big things. And as Erica said, again, having been in a corporate environment for 20 years, you have a handbook that you come in with that's 6 pages, that's digestible, versus hundreds of policies. It echoes the policies. You read the 6-pager and it just says, here's how you engage with each other. Here's what process looks like. Here's what's important. You don't overanalyze it. You don't litigate if somebody puts something that's halfway intended to be good, that's, meant in a different way. We talk it out as a group. I mean, it's just, we need to just get to the work. I don't think anyone in the community, if they watch 50 minutes of this, would care, to be honest. They just say, get to work, go fix the fall schedule. I don't care about this. I've never been in an environment where you discuss an operating norms document for more than 25 live hours. So I'm ready to just be a board member and focus on the important stuff. And I think that all 7 of us are there. So I do feel like everybody gets heard, everybody gets their time, and everybody has their different areas of influence. I focus on the finance, pretty clear. I'm not, a specialist in HR, and I'm not trying to be, and I yield that to my teammates here. So I feel good about it. I think if there's something that we realize in a few weeks, hey, it's kind of weird, this one clause in the 6-page document doesn't jive with how we're communicating, then we address it then. But I think we're all ready to get on with the work. So I appreciate everybody's opinions, and I think that we've been getting more efficient. So this is just meant to be helpful once we get done having meetings about having meetings.
Lenny?
I've spoken a number of times, just short and succinctly, I'm in favor of approving this document.
Thank you, Lenny. Unless there's anything else, I'm going to move on while I have the chance. I'm going to turn it over to Owen. We have many policies to talk about. So, Owen.
That we do. And right off the block.
Owen, just and Chair Ellenberg, just to let you know that Sarah's going to be keeping track of any potential changes. So give her a chance because there's a lot of them here. So she'll keep track of any changes the board may have with these policies.
Okay.
Just keep that in the back of your mind.
Great. Thank you.
That sounds great. Since I'm the board, the policy chair, I think what we'll do is just do a very brief introduction. We have, in essence here, 4 areas of policy to talk about. The first will be rapid review, where all the board members have looked at the policies. These policies have been compared against MSBA model language for the public. That's what we use as our plumb line. And rapid review, these have no changes. We're going to then, secondly, talk about policy review, and this will be in discussion, and there's 6, 7 of these that may invite discussion, may not, but we're thinking that we want to permit that to happen. The third is the pandemic response policy. I'll turn that over to John when that comes up. We've already talked a little bit about this. We have a specific policy that we're considering. And then our final group of policies will be 4 for action, and we will vote to approve or not approve 4 policies. So with that in mind, we can jump right into the policy review for rapid review. And does anybody first off want to pull anything off of this for discussion?
And just to add in really fast, Owen, these were all updated with any statutory updates. They were reviewed by the affected area leaders, MSBA, any legal updates, and that's what you have here.
Thank you. And then another point is that every year we try to go through 2 100 series blocks, and we're coming toward the end of this year. And so we're trying to get a number of things done here tonight.
Yep.
So
I don't have anything I want to pull, but I have 2 questions about policy 526 in the rapid review area.
Yes.
So the first one is, and they both are policy 526. The first one is 2H. And so the 2H says a person who engages in an act that violates school policy or law to be initiated in a student organization will be subject to discipline. So that means that applies, if I read this correctly, if I am applying to be in an organization and I agree to be hazed, then I can be disciplined. Is that what that says? And obviously whoever hazes also. And is that what we're intending?
Correct. That's my interpretation of it.
Okay.
Yes.
That's fine. Just want to make sure. All right. And then if you go to the next page, under Roman numeral 4B, there's a reference to a human rights officer. So my question is, do we have anybody by the title human rights officer? I'm not sure we do. I think that that these historically go to the HR director. So
the HR director in the job description is serves as the human rights officer.
So shouldn't we just call it the HR director?
Yeah.
Did you get that changed, Sarah, to change from the district human rights officer to the district human resources officer?
Director of human resources.
Sorry, to the
Yes, okay. I did. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
4B.
Yep.
Sarah, you may have to do a global search. It may show up more than once.
Okay. I will make a note to myself to do just that.
Those are my only questions on the rapid review ones, Owen.
Okay.
And
anyone else have some comments?
Yeah, I just have one, and it appears that on policy 520, student surveys, that our policy does not contain some of the sections that are in the MSBA policy.
Do you know which ones those were, Ellen?
Well, they follow student surveys, section 4B, and in the MSBA policy, there's additional policy language. So I'm just wondering if there's a reason why you're not recommending to put in the additional language.
Well, I'm taking on the authority of the vetter. I didn't actually do the vetting myself, and I don't have it up, the MSBA versus ours. I see ours right here. But if you'd like, we could suspend this and have this reviewed for our next policy meeting.
Yes,
this is only for discussion, Owen, so that if you take it back to policy and make a change, it can still go to action next month.
Thank you, Amy. Yes. Okay, so let's do that.
Okay, thank you.
But you don't have specific sections that are missing or where they might be? You're
Okay, so let me find them. Just a second. I can find them, but it will take me a bit.
Well,
we can just compare the two. I'm sure if we compare them, we'll see.
Okay.
It's really obvious when you pull up the two side by side. There's just sections missing.
Okay.
And several.
Okay. Well, Ellen, thanks for being eagle eyes on that. We will look at that. So, good. Appreciate that.
I've got a quick question on 610 student homework. We call out trying to keep in mind Wednesday evenings. And I got to pull up the exact language, but for some reason I'm recalling having a conversation about whether or not there was still a need to do that.
We had a discussion about that actually, and there's still interest in the community to maintain that. And I actually brought that up as a sore spot because a couple of years ago, my kids were given a lot of homework on Thursday and a couple of the high school classes, and they couldn't go to their Wednesday evening religious event. And so John said that he will raise awareness among the staff. And Julie thought this may have come about from scheduling issues with the block scheduling. So, but yes, I think there still is interest in that in the community.
Is there a way that we can gauge interest in that as to whether or not it is still Wednesday night? I know my kids, just anecdotally, my kids had their stuff on Tuesday nights for church stuff. And I know that the sports associations have moved away from the Wednesday night. And I'm not sure if they've done surveys or how they quantified it, but there was no longer that need to limit practices and games and stuff on Wednesday evening. So I know that there has been some digging in the community as to whether or not it's still that specific night that we need to worry about. I would just ask that if we're going to put something in there, that we really make sure that we have some sort of quantifiable need for it.
So Janie, I think that we have two options. I think we can either put this on hold until we go through our equity audit. And in that, we'll be asking a lot of those questions. Or we can pass this now, and this will be going through the same equity audit. So I think we have two options.
So there's two options.
Either way, I'm sure this will be one of the policies that we've been looked at.
Okay.
So,
I just wanted to raise it.
Yeah. Right. No, I think it's a legitimate question.
Okay.
And there's no substantive change in there. So there isn't a need to approve it now.
Right.
Right. At some point, you're bringing up something that I was really thinking about as I was reading these policies, especially given the importance of pursuing equity in our district. And I'm just, at some point, somehow, I would like to figure out if it's possible in this examination of each policy, if we can just incorporate the view, the eye toward equity into each of these, and make sure so that we currently have a system of reviewing our policies. And we have talked about the fact that we need to have a systemic change. And I think that as I am reading these policies, I'm trying to keep my eye toward that. But I would like that to be just part of our process. And I'm just wondering if there's any way to do that so that,
Well, Eric, Ellen, to that point, I'm glad you brought that up. What we talked about this at the policy meeting this past week, and because of the community interest and because of our strategic plan, what we decided, it's ultimately up to all 7 of us, but what we provisionally decided to do was to identify a handful of policies that are particularly prominent for concerns with equity. Among them, discipline and grading, and that we were going to examine the most conspicuous ones initially, and we were likely going to be dedicating about 15 minutes to every policy meeting going forward to talking about equity issues. Because of these reasons I've just said. So we do have a game plan in place, but that's not in concrete. It's not in stone. So we can flex with it.
Well, I want to add in too quickly from our discussion from the policy meeting is that we have on Thursday work session to talk about the equity work that we're planning on doing. And it's more than just pulling the policies, but to your point, Ellen, about what the process is, one of the things that I think that we need to address is the process of how we are going to address any inequities in our system. And before we talked about this, so instead of, we are looking at it with an equitable lens as we have as part of our process, but we need to do more. But before we do that, we need to figure out what the best process is and what voices need to be there, and to make sure that we're really making some institutional changes that we would need to make to address any inequities. And so I take this as the conversation needs to be about the process before we go through the checklist, so that we make sure that we're making changes that are actually going to have bigger impact. So that's my take, and I know that's on the agenda for our work session on Thursday.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
and
that's why I'm bringing it up. Thank you.
Yeah, and John has already spoken with Nikki Tischer to actually come up with that process.
Yeah.
And
Nikki and I are working on that process.
So that process is in place, and then we had a long conversation about, do we put policies on hold waiting for the process? It's like a chicken and an egg. And so we were like, we backlog to walk all these policies once we come up with the process through this process could be a while. And so we were of the mindset we should move forward with our policies, move forward with these policies and at the same time come up with this process. And so that's why we're bringing these today. But your question is the exact right question, Ellen, and it's on top of all of our minds, and we are working on it as a policy committee. And as soon as we have a better idea of a process, it will obviously come to the board first. So
I have a quick question with respect to 610. Did you decide to go ahead with it now and then have the equity audit when it comes around, or did you want to hold it? It wasn't clear to me what you decided on.
that's because it hasn't been made clear. So so I would ask the board, does the board want to hold on this policy? There aren't any substantive changes to it? Or does the board want to move forward as it is? It's either way. It's not, there are no substantive changes. So it's sort of either way. Lenny?
So Jamie raised the issue, so I would defer to her. If she wants it held, I'm in favor of holding it. If she says go forward, I'm in favor of going forward.
I think I'd hold off. I'd hold. It would be my first choice.
Cool.
The two.
I'm okay with that.
I am too.
Okay, so we'll pull it then.
Is that Matt and Ellen? Are you okay with that? Okay, so let's pull that. Sorry.
We're not actually pulling it though, right? We're just bringing it back to committee to discuss again. And then we'll take it, or we're taking it off at that point.
We're not gonna discuss it again until we have a process for how to review it. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so we'll not take a vote on this, but I think we've walked through all of these policies. And if everyone's satisfied with our rapid review discussion, we can move on to our formal policy review. Everyone prepared to move ahead? Okay, taking that, the silence as a general yes. So then we go down to policy 213. We can take, in fact, Jeff, are you just here for policies?
Yes, I am.
Okay, why don't we deal with Jeff's policies? That's 612 and 636, so we can let Jeff move on. And Jeff, do you want to offer some comments about 612 and 636?
Sure. So as I talked about in the policy committee, the policy on workload is largely, I believe that's 612. The workload policy is one that is it was required by statute, Minnesota statute, that we identify that we have a process for identifying workload and certain considerations for special education teachers as we go through the staffing process. We do have that process in place. There's been no substantial changes to that policy whatsoever. Again, it just directs the school district to have that process in place with special considerations. And again, nothing has changed in statute with regards to that policy. In the policy, the 632, was that it?
636.
I'm sorry, 636, which is title programming and parent participation. That again is driven by Title 20 federal legislation. And once again, that policy has been intact for a number of years, as you can see on the data on the bottom, but it actually goes back even further than that. That federal guidance has not changed substantially again over time, and we made some minor edits to it here at the last revision, but it was insignificant changes, and nothing substantial to be changed there either. So again, I would suggest that policy not be touched, as Title 20 has not changed at all in that time period.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So I open this up for discussion. Anybody on the board have any comments or questions? Okay, I take that to be no. Jeff, you have just so clearly communicated that you've left everyone speechless. So I guess we can move on from that. And we have, Jeff, I think we can then send you off into the night.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you for hanging tight with us.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. So then we go on to policy 213. And this is, we've had some amendments made to this toward the end. Erica, you made these. Would you like to talk to that?
Erica just stepped out for a second. She'll be right back. So do you want to jump to another policy when she comes back? You can go to that one?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Do you have changes to the school board committees? Do you want to talk about the changes?
Oh, you guys went so fast.
Yes, we're on policy 213.
Okay. Am I supposed to go through it?
How you put in some new language recently, and that you'd probably be the best person to speak to that.
Yes, sorry. So as we talked about in the last work session about adding into 213 the committee descriptions. So that is all one policy as opposed to being two different policies. And so we have the changes that were made to the school board committee policy itself, and then all the new language are the committee descriptions that we had talked about in, I believe it was the last work session, and so it's a fairly extensive policy. It is all one policy as opposed to being two policies. And so that's basically the main change, is adding all of that verbiage about the committee descriptions to it. So, and then the changes to policy, the old policy 213, which was the general overview of the committees, are changing the name of HR to governance. And then there are, the exact same changes to the board norms that were brought up before, which is talking about committees not straying into management work. So some of the stuff that Owen had brought up before, so I don't want to necessarily take too much time, but those are the only two changes to the committee, or there are three changes to the committee policy itself, but Owen had brought them up in the board norms, and the language mirrors verbatim what is in the board norm document.
Thoughts, comments?
So I've got 4 comments. So we'll start with Roman numeral 3B. That the board will establish by resolution for each standing or ad hoc committee. It's actually, except for the 4 standing committees, the board will do that, because we're no longer doing it by resolution. It's now incorporated into this policy.
Oh, yeah.
So it just should say, except for as stated in this policy, the board will establish.
Okay.
That's that one. Under 4A.
Except, do you want the language except as stated in this policy, or do you want the language except for the 4 standing committees?
I think except for the 4 standing committees.
Okay. Thank you.
And under 4A, this says individual board members have no authority to bind the board unless authority is expressly granted. The board cannot expressly grant the authority to a committee to make a decision. So a committee cannot bind the board, period. If a committee tries to take an action that binds the board, then in essence, it has to be an open meeting. If we do delegate, it becomes delegating to an open meeting. So I don't think that we want to include permission to bind the board under any circumstance.
So we're talking about basically just striking some language.
Correct.
Right.
Would you strike that whole sentence?
I agree, Lenny.
So it should, have no authority to bind the board in any matter, period. So we strike from unless.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
On 5A, it's like the 4th line down. It's with a line that begins with district on financial issues.
Yep.
This committee deals with matters pertaining to the school board.
Yep. Okay.
And then the other one is a question for the board. So if I go to my page 149, it is, what is it called?
We should get page numbers on this.
Yeah, it's D3.
It's so what?
Under policy committee D3. No, under committee assignments. Sorry. Under committee assignments, number 3.
Hold on. Let me find it. Committee assignments, number 3. Okay.
So what we provide is that the board chair makes appointments to committees or assignments to committees. This says assignments to the committee are effective until the following year's approval of committee members. And so technically the board doesn't approve committee members. Technically, the history of our board is that the board chair appoints committee members.
Could you just change that to appointment? Just change approval to appointment.
Yeah, I just want people to understand that we have this perfunctory approval through consent, but it's not really called for by our policies. The policy really gives the board chair the authority to make appointment. And so as long as everybody's good with that, then I think we want to change this to following year's appointment of committee members.
Okay, I have that.
And that's it that on 213.
All right.
I have a question on 604. No one else has a 213 question. Under 604, Roman numeral 3, B, 4C.
Right, 604. I'm not going to 604 yet. 604, 3C,
3D,
3D,
4C.
so 4.
And then it says the academic standards and curriculum will be implemented, though flexibility in the instructional content and materials and the instructional approach and delivery will be flexible. So I'm not sure that sentence made sense to me grammatically.
I think you're correct.
And so I just asked that someone figure out what the point was and change it to that.
Lenny, would you say that again, where this is?
It is Roman numeral 3, capital D, number 4, little c. And it deals with choice program.
That's got to be cleaned up. Right?
Yeah. And I will admit that I was relatively bleary-eyed by the time I got to this, policy, having read these prior 50 pages.
I'm just going to say that I think it's very clear.
I just want to state my objection to the policy committee providing us with 10 policies. It's like,
It's a lot of eye crossing.
yeah. All right, my next concern shows up in policy 617.
Hold on until I get there. If you would be so kind. 617, yep.
Let me get there. And so we have a definition of non-resident upper limit, but I don't believe that we still have non-resident upper limit either in the policy or in the appendix. Because if you recall, we had a discussion about whether we could have a non-resident upper limit.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this has become, and some, again, this was policy number 8 I was probably reading, but if people agree with me that there's no need for that, we should just delete that definition.
I agree.
Yeah, you do.
We need to delete it.
Yep, I agree.
All right, now I'm on to policy 618. And that's, by the way, 1618 is the last one I have. And this one's, my question is a little confused. It talks about high school class ranking.
Where?
Roman numeral 4E. So I think that we still have decile ranking, and maybe that counts as class ranking. So in other words, we used to have class ranks, and we got rid of class ranks. Mm-hmm. And I actually went to my daughter's, whatever it was, computer listing, and she doesn't have a class rank or a decile rank. So I just don't know if we still have class ranking.
For violin?
He has class for violin. So anyway, I just don't know, because I think we still do decile at the high school. And if that counts as class ranking.
I don't think we do.
I don't think you do.
I wonder if we just strike that language.
Though we do have academic honors, though.
Right. So just delete references to class ranking.
So just delete the reference to the class ranking.
So you're asking to delete all of E?
No.
No.
So E should read high school honors.
Yep. And then just take off class ranking in the definition.
Right, a student's high school grade point average and academic honors.
Mhm.
Solely
Yeah.
on.
That's a good catch.
I'm fairly don't. I just want to make sure that we're doing what is actually being done. I could have sworn they did deciles.
At one point, we did deciles. I think that it's possible that when you apply for college, that the guidance counselor letter says this student is in the first, second, third, fourth decile.
I'm is Randy here? He would know.
So
before we do, I would just check with staff that
Right.
I don't want to take this out if we actually are doing it, and I don't see any.
I'll follow through to see if we have that.
Right, and we might want to call it something besides class ranking because that has a different tenor than decile.
Right, and that's fine. I agree, but I think that more and more schools are not looking at ACT and SAT, but they're going to be looking at grades, and so I think that this may become more of an issue in the future. I'm not sure. Certainly, if we were in California, it would be.
And I have no other comments on any other policies.
Thank you, Lenny.
Thank you.
for your thorough reading, Lenny. I was going to go through the policies one at a time, but so Lenny jumped in and hopscotched a little bit. That's fine. We are sort of doing that. I want to call out policy 635. And our recommendation of the policy committee is to rescind policy 635. It just came about in the summer of 2014. It has no parallel in MSBA, and it really seems to offer nothing that the strategic plan doesn't already say. So Julie and Erica, if you have any comments to offer about why we suggested rescinding it?
No, I agree with everything you said.
Yeah, me too.
So that's a recommendation. Okay. And any other comments then about our policy review?
I don't. It looks like Ellen has a comment.
Well, I looked through the innovation policy, and I know that this is something that is important for the district, and it is not necessarily a policy. I'm just I'd like to hear from Lenny as to, you were on the board when this was placed on. Do you remember what the thinking was? If you could tell me.
Yes, I think the thinking was to try to promote innovation, and therefore if we had a policy that expressly talked to innovation, it might spur more. Also, you can see within the language that if there's a cost of $25,000 or less, then administration can approve it. It didn't need to go to the board. And that may be true otherwise. I'm not really sure about that. John Tope could probably answer that question. But it expressly carved out the administrative discretion to spend money without board approval to further innovation. So it was really just kind of a motivating policy. So I can go either way on this one, to be honest.
We just had a conversation as a policy committee that we felt that this really was a leadership-driven issue as opposed to a policy issue, and that driving innovation really is how you lead a district and what's written in your strategic plan and how you guide a district, and that it can't be driven by a policy. And we just didn't feel that this really added or subtracted anything from the district. And
I support that interpretation that Erica just described.
I'll echo Erica. When I read through this seemed to me more stuff that I was hoping to find in a strategic plan or the outcome of a strategic plan.
So what I like about this policy, so I agree we should be trying to stimulate innovation in the district. And what I like about this policy is that it speaks to some of the things that make me hesitate when I hear the word innovation. Sometimes people get very excited about things without having some of these approaches that are mentioned within this policy. So I like all of the support and promotion for innovation project development. I like that statement. I like the application process that outlines the needs and desired goals and required resources, an assessment approach for determining which innovation projects will be approved, a measured criteria for determining the success of the project. I like all of those things, updates on the innovation projects. I actually, I think that is likely how the district is approaching all of these projects, but this really expresses it. So I'm not sure exactly why we would want to take that out.
I think one of my rationales is that I'm a policy minimalist, that if the language is elsewhere in a significant document in the district, and to not have policies, because the more you have to interpret. And this is not exactly binding. This is more in terms of, this is guidance. And that's what the strategic plan's about. One of my concerns is that we do want to be moving along, and perhaps we could, so we've heard everybody's opinion on this one, and we could talk about this more again at our policy meeting, or we could just have a vote on it up or down next month. What are people's sentiments?
I don't think we need to bring it back to policy.
Okay.
Because the three of us agree, so I don't know what we would talk about.
Okay, so then let's just bring it up for vote next month.
Okay.
Okay, so we have nailed our policy review, and so then at this point, then I turn it over to John, who will talk about the new proposed pandemic response policy.
And wanted to invite Trevor back into the session too. Thank you, Trevor. I wonder if are you back? So I think if I could steal Erica's I think really characterized it well in our discussion of introducing COVID-19 pandemic response policy, which is in effect for 1 year. What this policy does is reaffirms authority as the pandemic unfolds and information continues to roll from the Department of Health, Minnesota Department of Education, the CDC, giving us direction, providing protocols, asking us to make change from the three different scenarios we have. The MDH may call and say, you need to shift from hybrid to distance, or whatever direction they would give us. And I think what I'm looking for is the flexibility to be able to pivot quickly and ensure that we're keeping kids safe. So that's behind this policy, just that reaffirmation of authority. It is only 1 year. And as the superintendent, I will, as it is indicated in here, I will provide the timely communication to the school board requiring any such requirement plan or protocol, unless the school board otherwise directs me to provide fewer updates. So I don't know, Trevor, do you want to just add what, as you're thinking about the language of this, anything else you want to add?
Sure. I think that the intent of this language is really to kind of put in place and make it clear exactly how this will work and to really put it in place just for COVID-19 as an emergency policy for 1 year, meaning it will only last for that year. And the intent is really to put into policy how this is probably going to work in practice anyway, and delegating authority while also maintaining the ultimate authority in the school board to try to maintain flexibility for your administrators in a uncertain time where we might have to make changes quite quickly. So that's really all I would have to say about it. Otherwise, I'd stand for questions when you're ready to start discussion.
Great, thank you. I know we briefly talked about this at the work session, and so I think we can, I know it's been a while since our work session, but we can, wherever we left off, I'll just open it up to board members for questions or comments. I think that we had talked about, or I talked about, I think the intent is to reiterate how our board and the district already operate, but to clarify it for the community that, and I compare it to a snow day, that the board does not give permission to John to give a snow day. He actually makes that decision on his own and lets us know that is his authority and what he does. And I think we need to be very clear during this time. It's a very, it's going to be a very confusing time. We're going to have a lot of different scenarios that we don't even know are going to come up. And we need to make sure that our administrators and our staff have flexibility to deal with scenarios that come up. And so this was requested by our administrators. They said this would be a tool to help them navigate this time. And so I support it, and I want to just make sure that our other board members have the opportunity to ask questions to Trevor or John or the other administrators that are on the, is it Zoom? The Zoom call? On the Google Meet. Yep. So. Owen?
Thank you. We've talked about this quite a bit at the policy committees, committee meetings, and I am in favor of it. I would like to make one change, and that is that we actually specify a time interval, and that would be monthly. The superintendent, and this is in the top paragraph of the responsibility section, it's already amended language. The superintendent or their designee must provide at least monthly updates to the school board regarding such requirements, etc. And the other is, I wonder if we need a series number or if this would be a policy that wouldn't need a series number. Those are my two observations and questions.
So, Owen, I think the way, and Trevor, correct me if I'm misinterpreting that, but you're asking for less frequent communication with monthly. I think the language here is suggesting is that at least timely. So if something happens on a Wednesday and the MDH tells me I need to change a program, close a school, I don't provide you that information in my monthly update to you. I'm providing you to in a timely fashion, which I would say would be that night. I think that's what the spirit of this language is. Is that what you're stating here, Trevor?
Yeah, and I think this one changed a little bit from the last time that I saw it. Okay. But yeah, I think initially we had talked about exactly what that time frame was going to look like. And I think ultimately as a board, you just have to decide what you're comfortable with. I would note that in the last, it's in the, somewhere in here, it does say that prior to putting them in place, the superintendent will at least notify you. So you are going to get some of that notification ahead of time. So, as far as does it have to be weekly, monthly, I think it might make sense, as John was suggesting, to just have it be a little more flexible there, because if there's no timely update, you don't need a weekly update, basically just saying everything's the same as last week.
So I think, I think there's no way we could not possibly get a monthly update because of our board meetings. So I'm not opposed to putting that in there, because in reality we'll get an update on a monthly basis if that makes you more comfortable.
Actually, you know what? I'm fine. I'm fine with it. The spirit of which John said works with me, and it's just a 1-year policy. So I'm fine. Timely is fine.
Okay. Ellen?
Yeah, so I'm ever the optimist, and I am not sure we need to leave this as a policy in effect for 1 year. It could be until the for 1 year, maximum of 1 year, or if the COVID pandemic is declared no longer an emergency by the governor. I mean, I don't see why we would be keeping this in effect after the governor says there's no longer a pandemic.
So, Ellen, would you be comfortable if we amended it to emergency policy in effect for 1 year, or governor's announcement otherwise, something to that effect?
For in effect for a maximum of 1 year.
We can, the way I understand it, and we talked about this in policy to address that, Ellen, is that we talked about if come November, COVID has disappeared and we need to get rid of this policy, we can vote to get rid of this policy. That's how it's set up, correct? Like, is that true, Trevor? Right? We have the authority to bring it up and say, okay, we don't need this anymore. Our other policy that's also in place, our other pandemic policy, right? We could vote to end it early if we needed to. So it sounds like you wanted the authority to end it, or
I want it to be an automatic clear. When the pandemic's over, this is no longer in play.
I think it's hard to say. I think it's hard to have a clear ending, because I think none of us know what being over means. I don't. Well,
yeah, I don't know. I think you just get ambiguous. I think 1 year is fine and we rescind it if everyone's fine and 300 million vials of vaccine have been delivered by January. I mean, it just, I think I don't think that's reasonable. I would just leave it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, at some point, I'm hoping the governor's going to say we're done, and
I hope I'm wrong.
And I'm hoping that it's sooner than a year. So,
but I guess even if the governor says we're done, that doesn't mean the impact to our district is done.
Absolutely, and the thing that I was going to just confirm with Trevor is that this and in front of people, this is nothing that John doesn't already have. These are not new. This is not a new authority. We basically give him, as Erica had said at the beginning of this, we have basically given. We're saying it again, but we don't really need to. This is pretty much in 209.
Yeah, I think that that's a very good point. You do not need this policy. It is not required. You don't have to put it in place. This just provides that clarity. And I agree that in practice, this is how school districts work. Something comes up, your superintendent handles it, and then he brings it to the school board and says, do you agree with this? Should we continue with this process? And that's really what this outlines.
Okay, so I just wanted that to be really clear. I am looking, I'm glad that for the safety of our kids, we are going to be having these clear protocols that will be attached to this. And I'm not Lenny was bringing up the process for attaching appendixes to this policy. So I just kind of want to talk a little bit about what the right process is for that. I don't even know.
Yeah, and if that was directed to me, I think that the process is really what you make of it and what you want it to be. Appendices are not outlined in your policy 208 about how you would adopt them. It does not, an appendice does not require a 2-meeting approval process. And essentially what you're saying here is your superintendent is going to put that in place. And then at the next meeting, and I can't remember the exact language, but at the next meeting, the board will either fully adopt, overturn, or revise any requirements. So that would just be a simple majority on a motion or resolution at your meeting. You'd put it on your agenda that you're going to look at the plan that the superintendent has put forward, and you're either going to approve, amend, or adopt, or reject it at that meeting. Doesn't have to be multiple reads, can be just at that single meeting.
Julie?
No, I wanted to echo what Owen had said earlier in support of this policy. And I think that one of the things that I think is important about it is it does show what John's doing for his decision making, right? What are the resources that he's looking at, and that it's in one place so that anyone from our community can go and say, how are they handling things? And then they can look and say, these are the resources that we're using as best practices, and who's so that's, I just wanted to echo what Owen had said earlier and why I am in support of it as it is.
One quick thing I wanted to mention is that this policy doesn't preclude certain decisions coming to the board. For example, last spring when we passed regarding changes to the grading system, there are going to be certain high-level decisions that we will need to make as a board. And so I just want to make sure everyone understands that even though we are passing this policy, I'm sure John is going to recommend that there are decisions that are going to need to be elevated to the board. Be it a policy that we need to look at or decisions that need to be crystal clear that have to go to the board, whether it's a masking policy or something like that. So I wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page with that.
And Ellen, to the point that you brought up, as a policy minimalist, I was also a little concerned and had reservations that this was extraneous. And Jeff, who's now gone, stated that he believed, sort of along the lines of what Erica was saying, that it was pretty close to imperative that a greater clarity be given to the administration and to staff about how we'll move forward in the pandemic. So that communication piece won me over. So just to throw that your way.
Right. And I too am obviously, considering my comments about the norms, I really am a minimalist, but I can understand why you may want this policy. So with respect to that, I can appreciate that, and I can see that this would be the place to look for policy. With that in mind, I would recommend, though, that we come up with a number so it can be placed within the policy book on our website. And I would also like to add the word in that section that you were just talking about, first paragraph of responsibility, at least timely, and add the word updates to the school board. So it's in the sentence, I think it's the second sentence.
Yep.
The superintendent or the designee must provide at least timely, and then insert the word updates. If the board would agree to that.
Yep, for sure.
Okay.
Trevor, what recommended series would you put this in?
Again, that's really up to you. I think that it probably would make sense in either the school board or administration, so either the 200 or 300, but I don't believe you have a policy for how you do that, so you have a lot of flexibility in where you put it, what you number it.
So 308 would be the next number in administration, and since it's a allocation of responsibility to administration or the superintendent, I'd put it under admin rather than board. I recommend 308.
308.
308.
I'm fine with that.
And then I've got a couple of questions.
Sure.
In the last paragraph, it says the school board has the ultimate authority to fully adopt, overturn, or revise any such requirement, plans, or protocols. I would like to add at any meeting, because it's ambiguous to me as to whether we would need 2 meetings to do something in terms of accepting or rejecting or changing the policy.
Yeah, that was what I was getting at earlier with the work session, Lenny. So thank you for realizing that better.
So where it says the school board has ultimate authority to fully adopt, overturn, or revise any such requirement, plans, or protocols at any meeting.
Yep.
I like it.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Okay. And then it seems to me that people are in favor of this policy. And we know on July 27th, the governor is going to issue, or the week of the 27th, the governor is going to say something. Our next official board meeting is August 10th. And while we may have a work session, I think that it's probably beneficial to adopt this tonight. And Trevor, this is a regular scheduled meeting, so our obligation was to give notice of the meeting and not necessarily give notice that this was an action item, correct?
Correct. This is on your agenda as an item. At a regular meeting, you can amend the agenda or add an action item at any time. I think that the safest course of action would probably be to have a first vote to add the approval to the agenda, which you need a 3/4 majority for, and then have your vote if you're going to vote on it. But even that is being very hyper technical because it's on your agenda. And so you've given notice to the public at a regular meeting that you are going to give consideration to this topic.
So I would move that we add this to the agenda as an action item.
So I have a motion to move this to the agenda as an action item. Is there a second? Okay, we have a second. So we'll vote by,
Was the second by Owen?
Owen, yeah.
Thank
So
you.
we'll vote by roll call on the motion to move this to an action item.
And so before we do that, John, I take it would be handy to have this adopted now, just to give.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lenny.
So you ready for me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Allenberg,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Green,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Michelson,
Aye.
Shaw,
Aye.
Wallen Friedman.
Aye.
So the motion to move the pandemic response policy to an action item has been approved. Trevor, do we vote on this now or do we move this to the action portion?
You certainly could. It's up to your prerogative as a board chair.
Why don't we go ahead and vote on this now?
Do you want me to bring a motion?
Yes.
So I move that we adopt what has now been numbered as policy 308 with the 2 friendly changes that were made to the verbiage.
Okay. We will now vote to approve the pandemic response policy, which is now policy 308, with the 2 friendly changes to it.
And I did miss who made the second because I was writing.
I did.
Julie, thank you. Okay, so Allenberg.
Aye.
Fox.
Aye.
Green.
Aye.
Jones.
Aye.
Michelson.
Aye.
Shaw.
Aye.
Wallen Friedman.
Aye.
Policy 308 / the pandemic response policy has been approved.
Thank you, board, and thank you, Trevor.
Thank you,
Very
everybody.
helpful.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good night. Just kidding.
We're only like 25% done.
Yep. 4 hours and 45 minutes. It's rolling.
Well, the good news, Erica, is we only have 16 minutes left.
Oh,
The video.
no, that doesn't start until next time. We're now going to move to our HR committee name change, and we've spoken about this again for a while, but I just want the public to know that this is changing the name and broadening the scope a little bit of our current HR committee to a governance committee. The change is also reflected in policy 213, which outlines our board committees, which we spoke about earlier in our policy review. So are there comments or questions about this?
No.
No? Well, that concludes our discussion / one action of this part of the meeting. We now have our regular action portion of the meeting, and the only thing we have up for vote in this action portion are some more policies. So I'll turn it over to Owen again for these policies.
Okay, so we start off with policy 203. This is part of the operations of the board.
Owen, let me interrupt for a second. So I move to approve policies 203, 209, 5, and 806. Is there a second?
I second.
Second.
All right, go, Owen.
I got so excited we were into this action portion that I forgot the.
Okay, I can vote for 3 of the 4 policies. So.
Oh, now it's time for discussion. So.
Okay. So policy 203 is one of the board operations policies that we've talked about, and we discussed this last week. So I don't have much more to say about it than that. We can vote on this.
Owen, you're going to vote differently on one of the policies.
9.
Okay.
So may I make a suggestion, which is that I withdraw my motion, and instead I have a motion to approve 203, 505, and 806.
Okay, I would second that.
Chair, may I withdraw my motion?
Yes.
Okay, now I move to approve policies 203, 505, and 806.
Second.
And then, can we take a vote?
Are there any comments? Does anyone have comments or questions on 203, 505, or 806? Okay, well, let's go ahead and vote by roll call on policies 203, 505.
Actually, sorry.
Sorry,
So
Ellen.
I forgot that this is where we would insert, if we would want to insert in a meeting, that there would be a line for board discussion for data requests. This would be put into the meeting agenda. So
I'm confused.
So
where would that be, Ellen?
Pardon me?
So where would that be? Under the agenda or under the.
It would be under operation of the school board agenda.
So where we have call to order.
I'm confused as to what we're talking about.
So Ellen wants to add an item called data request in the 1 through 12 format for the board meetings.
No way. That's on policy on page 3. It's not numbered. And it's
4A. So
Roman 4A.
I personally am not in favor of that change since we talked about discussing a process and we haven't talked about a process.
Well, we just created a process in the board norms.
We've had a data request process for a year and a half, and the board norms is actually just a very similar version of it.
Right. So that's what I'm talking about.
So wouldn't this fall under E1, make a request to the board chair or superintendent prior to the meeting for item presentation material they wish to be considered, added to the meeting? I mean, doesn't that fall under that line? Data would be a request for material.
it could be handled that way.
Okay. So if you have, I mean, that's not fleshing out the process, but well, actually it is, because then you can make a request.
Right.
So I believe that Ellen's request can be honored in other means.
Correct. It was my understanding at our work session, we were going to talk about if, as a board, we need to talk about a better process for gathering data.
So, Ellen, how do you feel about that?
What?
Ellen, how do you feel about what Erica just said there?
Well, I'm not sure how often this will come up, so maybe it doesn't need to be a separate agenda item, but the board is really trying to come up with a system for giving board members the opportunity to get board consensus on information requests. So if it's part of the agenda, then it's quite clear that there would be the opportunity to create that consensus, looking ahead at what information we would want to have presented to us at a future meeting.
My only point is that we haven't created the system yet, so I don't think we should define a meeting.
Well, okay, so in the interim, what our policy says is that any board member 1 week in advance of the board meeting can say to the board chair or the superintendent, I would like to add a data request to the next meeting. And the chair and the superintendent have the right to either put it on the agenda or not put it on the agenda. If they choose not to put it on the agenda, then assuming it's a regularly scheduled board meeting, the board member could at that meeting move to amend the agenda to add a data request. If the board as a whole supports it, it's added to the agenda. I mean, that would be the current process. It's not as clean as what you're suggesting, Ellen, but it is a mechanism to raise a data request.
So do others on the board want to add this change?
No, I don't.
Well, I like the sentiment of it, yes, but I'd be satisfied if Ellen is satisfied that we can find other ways to get that done.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to make sure that I mean, here's the situation is that we are saying that the only way that in the board norms now we're saying that the way to get information is to get consensus of the board. And if it can't get onto the agenda, then there'd be no way to even talk about it. But I'm not hearing a whole lot of support for this, and so I can let this drop.
Okay.
So are there any other comments on 203, 505, or 806? All right, let's vote by roll call on policies 203, 505, and 806.
Okay, Allenberg,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Green,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Michelson,
Aye.
Shaw,
Aye.
Wallen Friedman.
Aye.
Okay, policies 203, 505 are approved. Do I have a motion to approve policy 209?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, are there questions or discussions on policy 209?
I just want to say why I have reservations about this and why I will vote no. And that is what I talked about earlier, the conflicting loyalty with the advocacy group and so forth. So that's my objection. We talked about it. I don't need to discuss it.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on policy 209? Okay, I think we're ready to vote by roll call on policy 209.
Okay, Allenberg,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Green,
Aye.
Jones,
No.
Michelson,
Nay.
Shaw,
Aye.
Wallen Friedman.
Aye.
Policy 209 is approved.
Well, gang, as we have just finished talking about policies, I want to tell you why there's so many on. First off, part of it is that Brian Bass is no longer with us, and so I didn't get the sounding board, and I didn't anticipate we'd get into so much discussion. So I'm sorry that I've been a part of delaying this meeting, but at least we can take the satisfaction. We got a lot of business done, so congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you for your work, Owen, on the policy committee.
Thanks for pushing us. This was productive.
Yeah. Next on the agenda, are there any board liaison or committee chair reports?
There is none from teaching and learning.
Finance or, well, we just did policies. Hopefully there are no other policy updates. You're cut off, Owen.
Okay.
I don't have anything, so I will move on. From a leadership update perspective, I wanted to let the community know that we did a review of Superintendent Schultz, and I wanted to read the review, summary of the review for the public. On June 22nd, 2020, the school board met in closed session to conduct an evaluation of Superintendent Schultz. In general, the board's conclusion is that Superintendent Schultz has performed very well. Areas of exceptional work include 1, Dr. Schultz's response to the state mandate for distance learning during the coronavirus pandemic. His leadership during the creation and management of new and complicated systems and learning models with unknown time parameters was above and beyond expectations. 2, Dr. Schultz's work with financial oversight of the district. He was proactive in keeping the district in a good financial position, especially during uncertain times. We appreciate that he brings in key stakeholders, including site leadership, to the table to understand implications of budgetary decisions. 3, Dr. Schultz's interpersonal relationship and communication skills continue to be a strong point. 4, Dr. Schultz's ability to build teams together and collaborate on key issues. It was specifically noted that his ability to listen to the voices at the table and know the strengths of those around him. He's good at listening and being nimble. The board did identify a few areas for improvement. 1, the board would like to see Dr. Schultz demonstrate more strategic leadership in the form of leveraging his experience and educational background and insights in guiding the board with the same assertive, clear, and direct and productive communication that he exhibits with his district lead team. 2, in the area of time management, the board would like to see Dr. Schultz be more intentional in his willingness to accept and decline tasks, projects, and work in an effort to workload, allowing him the time and ability to provide a satisfactory level of follow-up. 3, the board would like Dr. Schultz to seek more opportunities for feedback and input from the site and classroom levels and consider using that information as part of an ongoing feedback loop to identify areas of improvement. With that said, on behalf of the board, we want to congratulate you on a good year.
Thank you very much, Barb.
You're welcome. The only thing I want to update the community on is on the 16th, which is Thursday, the board is going to have the first of what will probably be multiple meetings about equity work and what we're going to do from an equity perspective and renewed focus on that. So if you want to tune into our work session, there will be a link for that. And John, do you have any leadership updates?
I do not.
Okay. So with that, thank you to everyone participating and everyone in the community. I will adjourn our meeting. For board members, if you can stay on, I believe Zach is going to
We'll stay on this meeting.
Stay on this meeting, actually. Zach's going to YouTube feed and we can touch base about our remaining work session items that we didn't get to